So if you're a fan of Diablo 4, you've probably heard of my buddy Rax. You know, he's kind of a big deal, and he just put out his most recent State of Diablo based off his experience playing through the first day of the PTR. I want to go ahead and zoom in a little bit and talk very specifically about the state of the Necromancer. So I played the PTR for about 12 hours yesterday, started a brand new fresh level 1 character, and basically tried to, as closely as I could, mimic the progression that you're going to be experiencing either walking into Season 6 or walking into the PTR yourself, just to give everybody kind of an idea of where the Necromancer stands right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and queue up some of this Tier 38 pit footage before I'd done basically any of the endgame progression on a Sever Necromancer, and just kind of wax poetic about how I feel the class is looking like, and some insights into at least the 5 core builds. That's going to be Sever, Bone Spear, Bloodlance, Blood Surge, and Blight. Nowadays, there are going to be 8 difficulties that you're going to play through. The first 4 are basically like our normal world tiers 1 through 4 right now. You go from like normal to hard. Once you finish the prologue, you can go into expert. And then once you hit level 50, you can go into penitent. Now, based off the way that the developers have described or sold us on the concept of these difficulties, it was going to be a pretty massive jump from expert to penitent. And then after that, there are the 4 torment levels. Getting into at least torment level 1 requires you to beat the pit on tier 20. And torment 1 is where you're going to start finding the best gear in the game, because that's where ancestral items can finally drop. Oh, keep that in mind. There are no more sacred items. You basically go from yellow to legendary to ancestral, and ancestral can't drop until you're in at least torment 1. Ancestral items come along with a ton of benefits. 1, they are a higher item power, so maximum item power before torment is 750. Now it's 800 once you get an ancestral item, so significantly lower than it was in the past. They'll always have a greater affix on them, and most importantly, you can temper them twice and masterwork all the way up to 12 of 12. If you're just using the normal legendary gear that you drop before torment difficulty, you can only temper them 1 time, so you either pick resource, or you pick damage, or you pick defensive, or you pick utility, and you'll only be able to masterwork them up to 4 of 12. Add on the concept that basically all the stats in the game are hyper squished. When you first start off, you are going to, as Rax rightfully pointed out, unironically be doing 17 damage. The numbers are lower, the difficulty should be more palpable, and progression should occur over a longer period of time. Now, I didn't really experience that at all. I was basically chomping at the bit in expert level, waiting to get up to level 50 to unlock penitent. I immediately jumped to penitent and did not notice a difference at all. And we'll come back over here just to kind of show you the gear that I was working with, because I'm going to say something that I personally find to be a bit crazy. And it might just be, look, I don't consider myself really a blaster. I have thousands of hours in this game, but I spend most of it in the dummy room of Tekiovishad testing stuff. I'm not a mega blaster like Rax and Woody, not really. I'm generally okay with my gear being like 8 out of 12 masterwork and just testing what they can do, not necessarily what perfect stats look like. But if you haven't seen the gear, you're looking at some base stats, some maximum life, some armor and res. I don't have perfect aspects. In fact, all the aspects have 5 more tiers of power. I didn't unlock any of them. I'm not using the strongest gems that exist in the game. But all of my gear is just maximum life, armor, resistances. I don't have crit chance, attack speed. I don't have lucky hit chance. I don't have lucky hit to apply vulnerable. I'm not using anything crazy. All of my aspects, again, aren't the maximum level. I didn't even put Paragon points in to that footage that you were watching. I had over 200 points to spend. I didn't use a single one of them. My weapons don't have tempers on them for the skills that I'm using. In fact, I basically didn't temper anything at all unless there's resource cost reduction or resistances. I did find a Ring of Sacrilegious Soul. It's not a max roll of it. It's not even close to it, but like I found it and I figured, we might as well just toss it on. And the most interesting stat I have on my gear is lucky hit chance on my amulet. So the gear is bad. The amount of power that I put into the build was minimum and low. I didn't masterwork. I didn't temper. But what you're looking at is a character with no Paragon points put in, even though I had 200 to spend, no activated glyphs, no mercenary, no rune words, like I just showed you, no relevant tempers. All I had was almost armor cap. I wasn't even armor capped for 1,000. Almost res capped across the board. And we are having no problem in Torment level 2, no greater affixes, no ancestral gear, no nothing. So what this says to me personally, at least on the Necromancer, which is going to be a wild thing to say here. But I think the game is a little bit too easy, and I hate when we're having conversations like that. But I mean in comparison to what the developers sold the difficulty of the Torment levels on. Now, I know if I was in Torment 4 and I tried to go do a Tormented boss on the gear that I'm currently showing you, I would probably die. But that's just because I wouldn't be armor and res capped. Going down to World Tier 3, I would crush any single Tormented boss on the gear that I just showed you. Not even a question. I would crush Lilith, no question. And I am positive that without adding anything else other than just putting in like 50 to 80 Paragon points, this same character right here would be crushing their way through World Tier 4 in any content. And I think that's probably a good thing for the majority of players, especially people who have been playing the Necromancer and not necessarily feeling particularly strong. Now, what I want to zoom back in on are the concepts of the 5 basic core builds. So again, Bloodlance, Blood Surge, Sever, Blight, and Bone Spear. I'm going to take the time today during the PTR to test things like minions, test more niche builds like Bone Spirit. Once you're at this point, you don't see me, but I'm air quoting the end game. And then more niche stuff like Blood Wave, just like pure ultimate builds, etc. But leveling on the Necromancer felt phenomenal, just as good as it always have. In fact, it felt significantly better, and it's because of the 2 new skills that we have access to, and I'll touch on those in a quick second. And then what I also have for you is basically like a very rough tier list of the core builds as I see them and what you would be able to accomplish on comparable gear without any real specific niche stuff other than just literally having the aspects that are relevant for your build, which I think if you're in World Tier 2 running the pit, you should probably expect to be able to have access to. But just to start off, let's go ahead and take a look at the new ultimate skill and the new key passive and why I think these are hilariously powerful game changers for your experience on the Necromancer, because I basically recommend using these on every single build up until you're actually like in the end game and you're looking to specialize in what your particular setup would need. Starting with Soul Rift. Soul Rift, first off, just looks insanely beautiful. But looking at Soul Rift in game is a very, very impressive just overall effect. Boom, you have this massive circle that falls along with you. You're just like, you know, absorbing the souls from everybody around you. It's insanely pretty. Just like 10 out of 10, probably the coolest looking skill that we have, which almost might be an issue because the rest of them are going to look kind of lackluster now. But Soul Rift has been panned as basically Bone Storm 2.0. Just very quickly for people who think that they're just both circles and sometimes can generate barrier. And that's the end of it. They're not the same thing. They don't trigger the same stuff. They don't work the same way. They're literally not the same skill. But like, I'm going to get flamed in the comments regardless. It's a different skill. It's not the same thing. Stop calling it Bone Storm 2.0. They're just bolt circles, guys. Y'all are really like the meme of like putting the triangle in the square hole at some points, but that's okay. We'll move past it. The cool part about Soul Rift is the package of benefits that it brings to your build, even if you're not looking to scale its damage in any way. So I guess in that regard, similar to Bone Storm, you may not care about the bone damage that it's doing, but you liked the package of benefits that came along with it. But Soul Rift is distinctly different in what it enables. I would say that Bone Storm enables an endgame build, and Soul Rift very strictly enables early game builds. The damage that does in an area around it is not particularly important for builds that don't care about scaling it. It is the second part, that every quarter of a second, so 4 times per second, you're going to absorb souls from enemies around you. When you do this, it's going to generate essence and generate barrier. Barrier, great for survivability, obviously, but really helping out on things like blood builds, where keeping fortified status and keeping as much fortify as possible can be hard in the early game. Barrier helps to protect your fortify. The essence gen from this is also absolutely bananas insane. So since it's going to trigger 3 times off of a boss or for 3 enemies around you, it happens 4 times per second. That's 12 essence per second, which doesn't sound like a lot, but especially in the early game where you don't have a ton of attack speed, you're only really attacking like once, maybe twice per second. And generating 12 essence basically completely alleviated all of my essence issues on any build that I was playing as long as I had Soul Rift up. The next awesome part about it is it's going to give you a just generic damage multiplier, making it good for every single build, whether it's bone or blood or heck, even minions. It's just good that you then gain this generic damage multiplier that's easy to maintain, so that you have a much wider window for being able to apply all of your damage, something that in early game Necromancer typically struggled with. And then probably the most important part is it just maintains permanent vulnerability on targets that you drain souls from. So against a boss, they are just vulnerable as long as Soul Rift is up. And the base Soul Rift is going to last for 8 seconds. You can temper for more duration. Ultimately, you can get like the unique helmet, which will increase its duration, but that's obviously much farther down the line. The long and short is that Soul Rift makes playing the Necromancer, even on skill usages like Blood Surge that has such a high essence cost attributed to it, feel very good. You just pop this while you're on the boss. You can just sit there and tank damage. You have basically permanent uptime on essence. You're getting that damage multiplier as well, so your damage ramps as it goes along and it stays for 5 seconds after. And then again, being able to apply vulnerable via Soul Rift opens up some interesting options for the majority of builds here, because you're not tied to having to use Corpse Tendrils to apply vulnerable, or be lucky enough to already be playing Sever or Bone Spear. You can basically just toss this onto everything and instead use Blighted Corpse Tendrils to generate Blood Orbs, which I'm basically going to recommend on almost every single Necromancer build, because the Blood Begets Blood multiplier in your Paragon is one of the strongest ones that's available in the game. And I think it's just Blood Orb season in Season 6. Go ahead and quote me on that later if everybody swaps over to it in the meta. But probably the biggest total benefit and thing that's going to make playing the Necromancer feel the best this season is the Affliction Key passive. So not only does this thing just like bare minimum outclass both Shadow Blight and Kalan's Edict, it's not even close. But even on things like early game blood builds, I would almost recommend this over running Rathma's Vigor. Because one, they nerfed Rathma's Vigor. I don't know why they did this, but they did nerf it. It just literally takes longer to proc overpower for you. But even on something like Ossified Essence in the early game, where you can't really manage 100% uptime of max essence on a Bone Spear build, most noticeably, just having a 15% damage multiplier for free, and all you have to do is apply vulnerable, apply shadow damage over time, so a single blighted corpse explosion, or apply crowd control, meaning cast Decrepify on a target. Affliction is a godsend. Huge damage multiplication, outperforms Blighted and Shadow Blight, because if you haven't done the math, basically all you need is a 30% damage multi on an aspect to outperform just clicking this, as opposed to trying to manage Shadow Blight procs. The secondary part of Affliction cannot be overstated how powerful and valuable it is. Affliction works in some interesting ways. The moment that the target is vulnerable, has shadow damage over time applied to it, or has been crowd controlled, every single time that you cast a curse or a curse is applied to it, they will take an 80% damage instance. Now, 80% damage instance isn't that big. So like right now on this one, when I click this, I just crit for about 1100 damage, let's call that on average. My Bloodlance build at this point is already doing 6-digit damage. So trying to scale its damage is not super important. But what this is incredibly good for is the early game, where clearing out trash by spending essence, casting a skill on it, was always a big problem. You need to save all your essence for the big elite monster or the boss. And sometimes you just run out of essence. You know what's pretty cool about having Affliction up? Well, it turns out that Iron Maiden can be made to not cost essence at all if you take the second bonus of it, so the enhancement. And not only will Iron Maiden then generate essence whenever it's applied to a target, but you can then spam it to trigger Affliction for free. Having a free damage button, even if it's not a super large damage multiplier, right? So it's an 80% weapon damage coefficient here. That's what it comes out to be. Let me turn on advanced tooltips so you can see it better. But being an 80% weapon damage coefficient, that also is shadow damage, so it's great on Sever and Blight builds as well, is fairly considerable if you look at the rest of what your damage would do. So right now, a rank 5 Bone Spear is doing 119% damage on its base attack. That's not that much higher than Affliction. Now, the only issue with it is that it is probably the loudest skill in the game, especially when it triggers off of Cursed Aura. It'll also trigger off of Blood Moon Breaches if you have minions running around. But yeah, the only issue that I have with it, it is super loud. But being able to convert Iron Maiden into a pretty fast attack speed damage effect that doesn't cost essence, that lets you regen essence during this time, or wait for a cooldown to come up, or you're waiting for Soul Rift to pop so that you'll go back to having essence again. Just a phenomenal tool. And the moment that you get Cursed Aura up, which automatically applies Decrepify, so it automatically applies the crowd control effect. So when the Iron Maiden and the Decrepify is reapplied, triggers damage instances like this. It's just free damage. You are running through trash without having to click anything and it's dying. That's how strong it is. So this combination of basically free essence management in the early game and free damage application, as well as a fairly decent damage multi, and something that will then scale with particular builds more strongly, makes this combination absolutely killer for the early game progression. And you're basically going to see this recommended on just about every single leveling guide if the person building it understands the power of these things. But now let's go ahead and swap over to, once I had actually put in Paragon, and swap over to a different tier 38 clear, again on Sever, which I think is currently the front runner as the best core skill that you're going to experience playing during the progression period and transitioning into the end game. Now, Bone Spirit's still going to outperform it for like raw damage and pip pushing, but Sever feels real good. And I mean real good. Like insanely good, like set a bar that the other skills couldn't even come close to. And while it might not outperform minions, I think the moment that you get its new aspect, which is Reaping Lotus, you're never going to turn back. Sever by far is the S tier build from my first day of progression. It is absolutely cracked out of its gourd. This single aspect gave it the AoE damage that it needed, gave it the better feel on controller that it needed, a significant boost to its overall damage. Soul Rift absolutely fixing all of its damage scaling issues, its essence cost issues, and Affliction, again, giving it a huge multi that didn't require a ramp up, and then a way of applying damage without having to spend essence, made this build absolutely killer. I think a lot of people are basically going to demand that you use Cursed Aura, as well as this combination of Abhorrent Decrepify and Enhanced Iron Maiden, along with Umbral aspect of all things. Remember Umbral? That was pretty cool. To have permanent essence inside of Density, and then once you're against a boss using Soul Rift, and then spam cursing when you're down on essence, to basically solve all the rest of your issues. Sever feels phenomenal. It was the best build that I piloted by a far margin, and I'm excited that Sever has returned to this place of strength, because for a very long time, Sever was one of the best Necromancer leveling builds before we all generally swapped over to Blood Surge and then ultimately Minions. But the experience on Sever was always very smooth, and they've given it the bite that it needs to also feel powerful. In the A tier, we're going to be looking at Blight. Blight of all things. This one actually really caught me by surprise, and I think it mostly speaks to the power of Soul Rift, the power of Affliction, not needing to ramp through Shadow Blight procs, which are just absolutely trash now. Can't stress it enough. Blighted aspect will not see use on any Necromancer builds this season, but Blight really felt surprisingly good. I was expecting a huge dip in performance from Sever down to Blight, but I just think the overlapping damage over time effects, once you can actually get your Wither node unlocked in your Paragon, is obviously a huge multiplier as well here, because while it's still capped, they actually did buff it. Blight just feels very good in this early game progression point, has a ton of great crowd control ability, just being able to overlap a ton of damage over time also means that while you're running around generating essence, you're still doing damage. Now, I definitely felt like Blight suffered from an essence issue, which was to be expected. Blight is actually like fairly expensive to cast at a fast attack speed. And using one of its biggest multipliers, which would be Great Feast, obviously comes along with an essence per second cost that's hard to offset. But even inside of this reality, Soul Rift and being able to again stack Affliction with curses to do free damage kind of made up for it in its entirety. There's nothing in the B tier. I would say that there's nothing that feels above average from these 5 core skills, but down into the C tier, average expectation here, we have Blood Surge and Blood Lance. While Blood Surge is still going to be a powerhouse for leveling, once you're actually getting into the point of progression where you need to have your Paragon, you're getting into higher Torment levels, until you get those unique items that empower these builds more specifically, they're just generally going to have essence issues. They're going to feel clunky. You're going to feel bad getting more attack speed on them, which comes along with more essence cost issues. And their ability to scale damage is generally encased inside of overpower procs, which at this point, you're not particularly good at actually managing. So Blood Lance here is actually outperforming Blood Surge only because its reduced essence cost allows you to more easily slot in Rathma's Chosen, which gets you enough attack speed that zerging down bosses and zerging down packs doesn't feel as bad. And that nerf to Rathma's Vigor is really, really palpable at this progression state. And then lastly, we have Bone Spear. Oh, sweet baby Diablo. Lucian, take me to the void. Bone Spear sucks. Now, there's a very specific reason why Bone Spear sucks, and I kind of want to highlight it back over in the real world where you're kind of looking at my face while I talk to you. Bone Spear is a skill, and most notably with its key passive Ossified Essence, means that you need to be casting it at 100% uptime of Essence whenever you possibly can. So if I have no targets that I'm firing at here, you'll see just how hard it is to generate Essence, because typically you have two sources of generating Essence in a very efficient way. Torment says it's going to drastically increase your resource cost generation when you successfully crit a target. So if I were to go through and successfully crit against this target right here, notice that I have increased Essence duration, which is great. And then as I'm going through, even though it's increased, you'll notice I'm nowhere near successfully regenerating and offsetting my Essence cost. And that's with this thing on an amulet, nearly tripling my Essence cost generation. Now, obviously, my gear doesn't have plus Essence per second across it. I just didn't come across any pieces that actually had it on it. Now, could I be re-rolling at the enchanter? Sure. Could I be tempering for like very specific resource cost and resource generation across my gear? Absolutely. But I was trying to represent what it would be like to start from level 1, no resources, no 2 billion gold, no infinite resources here, right? Like you're not going to have this available to you. You can't infinitely re-roll stats. And again, we're not getting ancestral pieces of gear. The gear we're getting is dog water until we're in Torment. So I didn't think it would be fair to just go out and very specifically change all of the stats on my gear to make Bone Spear effective when none of the other skills needed those stats. I used this gear and just swapped out the aspects for the build that I was playing. Now, the second funny part about this is that I also added on Exposed Flesh. Exposed Flesh, which basically is supposed to trigger every single time that you cast Bone Spear because of its inherently large lucky hit chance, and on top of the fact that the shards that come flying out of a Bone Spear can also trigger it. So back in the day, Exposed Flesh would single-handedly manage all of your Essence issues for you. And I don't even have a lot of maximum Essence here, but if I were to just fire off into 2 targets here, while I'm sometimes successfully re-triggering and getting all my Essence back, one, it doesn't happen 100% of the time, and any time that you are casting a Bone Spear at less than 100% of your maximum bonus Essence is insanely low damage output. The fact that I'm sacrificing so much damage and still am not solving the Essence issues without basically air-marked gear, like bespoke gear for this build in comparison to the other ones, nets this down into F tier very easily. The core skills for the Necromancer, while definitely experiencing some differences in relative power, basically everything on the left side here felt good. Darkness skills felt amazing. Soul Rift is going to be your friend on every single leveling build. Affliction is going to be your friend on every single leveling build. And the moment that you get access to Cursed Aura, you're going to put it on your pants, because activating Abhorrent Decrepify as well as Essence Generation from Iron Maiden made everything butter smooth, and then went on to activate a ton of systems that then further empowered your character in meaningful ways. I'm going to go ahead and try out the minion builds today on stream. In fact, I mean to get this video out before stream, so if you see this, come check it out live. I stream both on Twitch and on YouTube. I don't think everybody knows I stream on both of those services nowadays. And come hang out. I would love to see you there. Come bring questions, whatever you can think of. Or just let me know down in the comments if you had questions as well, if you found this type of breakdown a bit more valuable for your particular experience. I'm trying to just like literally bring better, more widely applicable, just like more of this audience and more of this fan base of Diablo 4 can benefit from type videos, as opposed to like the hyper niche things that I typically cover, which is like this bug activating this thing. So if you appreciated that, or if you had any feedback of how I could do it better, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. If you're brand new here, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video. Probably the easiest way that you can support here. It's completely free. It doesn't cost nobody nothing. I promise you, I don't spam like notifications or anything like that. You'll probably barely hear about me, but like we're very close to 60,000 subscribers, and it would be kind of cool to hit that before the expansion. But like, you know, who knows? Maybe that's a Christmas gift for me later on. But thank you very much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps you to better enjoy and better get a handhold on the PTR. And as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next one.